Okay, so I want to welcome everybody who's online with us tonight. My name is Mary Newton. I'm the president of the Reading League Wisconsin. And I want to welcome you to the third in our series of Wisconsin Educator Roundtables, where we've been looking at schools and districts around our state that are moving to align instruction with the science of reading. And some locations are deep into this process. They've been doing it for several years and are showing results already, and others are just beginning. But the important thing is that we have movement in Wisconsin now. So we're moving in that direction, which is very encouraging. If you need a certificate of attendance for tonight's presentation, near the end, I'll be posting the link in the chat. You can just click on the link and go and fill out the form, and I'll be sending those certificates out tomorrow. And if you have questions during the presentation, pop them into the chat, and then at appropriate times, we will access questions there and submit the questions to the presenters so that we can get those answered for you. And now I think I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to turn things over to our host, Rachel Hesprich.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel, and I'll be moderating. I'm one of the board members of the Reading League of Wisconsin. And Mary is sharing the screens, and she'll be moving the screens for us. And you can see that we have Kim and Deb from the Feller School. Sarah will be presenting. Sarah and Brady did the slides together, and Sarah will be doing the presentation on behalf of the New Berlin School District. And then Angie from Eleve-Strum School District will be presenting her slides and her information as well. Mary, if you want to go to the next slide.
Working on it, Rachel. Oh, shoot. All right, let me get back in here. Here we go.
Here we go. So just a few Zoom etiquette reminders. Please keep your mics muted, and if you would prefer, feel free to unmute when we ask questions at the end of each presentation, the 3 different presentations, or at the end for wrap-up questions. But feel free to post questions in the chat as well. And this session is being recorded along with the other 2 roundtables we've already done, and they will be posted on the Reading League Wisconsin's YouTube channel. And I'll have the link in there, but it's easy to find through a Google search. Next. So just to get started, I think it's important for us to see where in Wisconsin our presenters are from, and it gives you an idea what part of the state and where they are located. Since we are the Reading League Wisconsin and we are representing all of Wisconsin. Mary, go to the next one.
All right.
Here is the state and all of our presenters so far from all 3 of our roundtables. And we're very excited to be seeing that there's movement in Wisconsin, people investigating, people learning, people doing their best to improve reading instruction across the state. And we are glad to see that we have lots of different areas of Wisconsin being represented, and hoping to see more and more. And you'll see at the end of the presentation, if anybody else is listening, following along, watching the video, we are always looking for more people to share their journeys. You can go to the next one, Mary. One of the things that I have learned in my 30+ years in education, though, is the terms of education and how they vary greatly, and how I define a term can be different from somebody else defines a term, even within schools, districts, and especially something like science of reading that is very new to many people. So the Reading League, the National Reading League, that we are an affiliate of, has created a definition to basically kind of ground everyone, root everyone under what that understanding is. So I'm going to give everyone a minute to read the definition on your own.
Spinach, and we're going to eat, okay?
We have somebody that's not muted, so I think it's Karen. If you could mute, please. Thank you. So again, very important for everybody to understand that this is a definition that the Reading League developed in order to make sure that people understand what that term means. And to go a little bit deeper, Mary, if you can click on that link, what is the science of reading? For people that want to take a deeper dive and an understanding, looking more to share as well about the Reading League, this is a website, The Science of Reading, a defining movement that has lots of different resources and understandings of the why, the philosophy behind what the Reading League is trying to accomplish and our goals. Mary, if you want to scroll down a little bit to the video, please. So this is a preamble for our defining movement, and I think it's a great 2-minute video that just sets out the evening appropriately to help everybody understand the goals of the Reading League. And if you want to push play, thanks, Mary.
Humankind's most precious treasure is our children, and our future depends on them. We recognize literacy as a fundamental human right that empowers individuals in a society. We also know that grim life outcomes are connected to illiteracy. We are resolved to prevent the collateral damage that is incurred by our students, especially the most vulnerable among them, when adults have limited access to the convergent scientific evidence. Research has yielded proven assessment and instructional practices with which every teacher and leader should be equipped. We believe that providing educators with this knowledge is a moral imperative. We are committed to evidence-aligned reading instruction being scaled with a sense of urgency in a comprehensive and systematic way by multiple stakeholders. We know that our children can be taught to read properly the first time. In a knowledge economy, the currency of the 21st century will be built on the foundation of skilled reading. Students who can read well have a place at the table of opportunity, whether their aspirations lead them to preparation for college or the workforce. We believe in a future where a collective focus on applying the science of reading through teacher and leader preparation, classroom application, and community engagement will elevate and transform every community, every nation through the power of literacy. Join us.
Okay, thank you, Mary. You can go to the next slide. So I think that video does a great job of helping everybody understand the Reading League of Wisconsin was the first affiliate of the National Reading League because we as well believe in the power of literacy, and we are committed to helping support Wisconsin educators to provide evidence-aligned practices. But what does that look like? How does the school district go about that? So we have 3 different representations here tonight to help Wisconsin educators see what other people in Wisconsin are doing. So we're going to get started with Deb and Kim from the Feller School, and I'll turn it over to you both. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. I think that the video that we just watched resonated really deeply with me. One of experiences that I had was that I worked with some people that wanted to work on literacy skills with people who are incarcerated. So I had a wonderful opportunity to lead a training of 30. They were educators, just people of all different walks of life. And in order to do this, I worked with the jail ministry, and it was required of me to have a tour of the jail. And in doing so, it hit me so very hard as to the importance of ensuring that every child has the opportunity to learn to read. So my dream is teaching all kids to read. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a retired elementary school principal. I had 35 years of experience in public education. I've listed some of the key roles that I had in different districts. I spent a lot of time in the Monona Grove School District, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But I want to start with another powerful story that I'm going to date myself. In the 1980, I was an undergrad at University of Illinois. And we were required to read A Nation at Risk. And it was a federal report, and it spoke again about the urgency to make sure kids can read and why that's so important, and where we were at as a nation with teaching reading. And unfortunately, things haven't moved too far. So my own personal story is kind of interesting. At University of Illinois, the Center for the Study of Reading was there in the early 80s. I did have really good pre-service teaching training in phonics, and it was systematic and direct instruction, vocabulary instruction, and also comprehension. I had nothing on phonemic awareness or phonological awareness, and fluency was all embedded in the comprehension strategy. So I finished up my undergrad, went into the schools. A couple of years later, I wanted to go back and get my master's. Well, literally within 3 years, and I was still at University of Illinois, we had a seminar. And one of our seminars was, we were lucky to see and watch another methodology of teaching reading. And it was the reading recovery, Mari Clay. And literally we watched through a window. And from that point on, in my graduate work, we were learning about whole language. Ken Goodman was a superstar. That was someone that we had to study and learn about. And mind you, I was going for my master's degree in teaching reading. So that was such a dichotomy to what I was taught in undergrad and that strong phonics foundation. So then I went out to the public schools. I taught in Michigan, taught in Illinois, and everywhere I taught, I was met with balanced literacy, guided reading, Patricia Cummings, the 4-block reading methodology. And when I landed myself in Monona Grove, I started there as a first grade teacher. And I kid you not, I can remember thinking, as I'm teaching this little girl to read, and she had to read one of those pattern books. And it was like at the zoo, and she would read, I saw a giraffe, I saw an elephant. And I kept thinking, there's no way she knows these words. Maybe she knows I saw, but that's just because she's memorized the pattern. So I started digging in deeper around the idea of teaching reading. I popped into four-year-old kindergarten, where I learned a lot about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. And then I also had the next step for me was going into being a reading teacher. And that shifted me significantly. Again, as a reading teacher, I worked with another person who she was very grounded in the guided reading. And I kept thinking, these kids can't read these words. We need to be teaching them phonics. So as a reading teacher in the Monona Grove School District, I was lucky enough to work with some really stellar, top-notch district leaders who knew the science of teaching reading. We brought in, and so if you look down on our my little slide there, we studied the National Reading Panel's work. During this work, we had a wonderful school psychologist who brought in DIBELS and trained all the reading teachers and the kindergarten, first and second grade teachers on DIBELS. So we started with the data, and the data was indicating that our kids were not making the mark, particularly in phonological phonemic awareness. And then we had a wonderful CNI director, and his charge was to take the K-12 curriculum and do an in-depth study on it and almost map it to what the National Reading Panel was sharing with us and what we learned from that in the way of what should a core reading program look like. And then we found we've got to change our practices. So we trained teachers, we even trained parents. And the crux of it was, as a collective school district, we adopted an evidence-based core reading curriculum. So from Monona Grove, I then popped over to Madison, and this is my link to Kim. I spent 4 years in Madison, trying to just make a difference with practices in Madison, and they're still on their path. But I was lucky enough in my retirement to meet Kim through a mutual friend. She's actually on our board. And so Kim's passion was one of my passions, of opening a school. So I'm going to toss it over to Kim, and she can tell you about her journey and the science of reading and how we became connected and where we are at with Feller School.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, I'm Kim. And my journey, I can't really read my slides because my eyes are not doing so well. I guess I need a new prescription. But I'll just tell you my story is that I too was a first grade teacher and a full day kindergarten teacher. And I was immersed in guided reading, the strategies of reading, cueing systems, whole language, balanced literacy, all of that. And in fact, I remember back when I taught in Washington, D.C., in the Washington, D.C. area, being a leader in showing other teachers how to take running records. And so, and I created the first book room, leveled readers in the book room, and got kudos for that from my principal. And, I was really happy with what I was doing. And then I moved to the Pontiac, Michigan area and taught there for about 8 years, first grade again. And, thoroughly enjoyed the kids and everything, and did my guided reading, and was pretty pleased that I'd get them to grade level. And we really didn't have too many interventionists in the district that I was in at the time. In fact, they were called reading teachers, not interventionists, but they were called reading teachers. And essentially they just kind of came in and told us what to do. And it was all around the whole, well, you have to take a running record on this child, and you have to bring it to, the RTI meeting if you want, to get this child any additional support. So that's why I was there, and then moved back here to Wisconsin and received or earned my reading 316 reading teacher licensure. And then I started working within the Verona School District as a reading teacher, and loved it again. I was bringing kids to grade level. Parents were so happy with me. Administrators were so happy. Teachers were so happy that I pulled most of those kids' behavior problems out of the classroom for half an hour, not knowing that these kids were really frustrated, and maybe that's why their behavior was what it was. They weren't getting it, but working with a child one-on-one obviously is going to make any child happy to be able to do some things that, receive some positive feedback one-on-one. And so I loved my job. But then I started just watching what was going on, and I got very frustrated because even though everybody was happy with me, I wasn't happy with myself. There was still, 20% of these kids that we're putting all of our heart and soul and energy and time and work with, and they weren't moving from year to year. The progress was not there. So I left. I left my full-time, full pay job, and my husband was not real happy, but I decided to do a tutoring program after school and then during the summers. And that's where it just hit me really hard, because the kids that came were the kids that had the resources. The parents were able to pay for tutoring outside of school. But even that didn't satisfy me, because those same kids would go back to the same thing the next day and feel the miserable feelings that they were feeling. And in anything, they were probably a little more confused, because I was starting to learn more about the science of reading myself. My story is that I read Uncovering the Logic of English by Denise Ide. It was published in 2011. I started networking with other tutors, and found out that a lot of the tutors in our area are actually speech and language pathologists. So I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from Denise Ide, and realized, oh my God, language is so important for for kids to be good readers. And so that it just accelerated this whole mission to, it's not fair that these kids are spending all day in school not making any progress. It's not fair to the parents to have to drive them to my home, 2-3 times a week, and then 5 days a week during the summer, and pay me on top of that. And it made no sense. And so I just had this dream: what if we opened a school? And I toured some other schools in the country who were focusing on kids with dyslexia. And that opened up a whole nother world for me about dyslexia, because I kid you not, and I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but in the schools, we are not allowed to use the word dyslexia. The whole mentality was that dyslexia is just nothing more than a scheme to get money, that it was just a made up thing. And obviously that got me very curious. If there are schools around the country that focus on kids that have dyslexia, and they've been in existence for 65 and 70 years. I actually toured the Shank School. They call it the Skank School because that's the founder's name, but I choose to call it Shank because it sounds better. But that's in Atlanta, and they've been in existence for over 70 years. And I learned about what they were doing, the small class sizes, the explicit systematic instruction, the Orton Gillingham, the simple view of reading, all of that stuff. And I talked to the teachers and I talked to the administrators. I'm like, we don't have anything like that in Wisconsin. And I asked all sorts of questions about how do kids feel going to this specialized school? Do they feel like something is wrong with them? Is there a stigma in that and all of that? So I was totally reassured that, this is a good thing. This is a really good thing. So that's why we decided, Deb and I, to recruit some parents for a school board. We got our 501c3 3 years ago. We have a school board. We have all the things that we need except for money to get a school going. But let's see, what's the next slide look like? Could we look at that? Yeah, so Deb, do you want to talk about our vision for?
Sure. So in our discussion around, if we were to do this, what would be the focus? We've had lots of board meetings around our mission. And it really boils down to, we want to prevent reading failure in kids. And we know we can. Kim and I both reading teachers, but also just the idea of what tonight's focus on is the science of teaching reading. We want to do it systematically. We'll use the logic of English. We want kids to do it with confidence. However, our vision is focused on reading, but it is a full comprehensive school. So we would have social studies, science, math, and the related arts. But what we are going to put out for kids and families, and we've had some classrooms already this summer. We had some students where we were using the logic of English, and Kim can talk a little bit more about that. But our vision is to prevent reading failure, and we know we can do it. You want to go on to the next slide, please, Mary? And one of the things, I'm just going to talk real briefly about this, being a public education person. We know we're opening up a private school. And for some people that may, not be comfortable to them. However, we don't believe it's just about us. We're not in competition with private schools. We want to do teacher training, which Kim has led teacher training. And we want to embrace the whole full options for parents, so that kids can, the goal is for kids to read, but parents can have a choice. If something's not working in one place, hopefully maybe perhaps they'd come to our school and it could work in our setting. And if they chose to go back to the public education system, that would be fine with us. Our main focus is preventing reading problems.
Yeah, so could we move to the next slide? This Deb's been talking about the logic of English, and there's actually Denise Ide, the author of Uncovering the Logic of English, has created a curriculum, and it is just amazing. It's an incredible curriculum. I went to her training. There's a funny story you can see on our website, fellerschool.com. And that's just that after I read that book, within like 24 hours, I just consumed the Uncovering Logic of English book. I called up Denise because she lives in Rochester, Minnesota, which is 3 hours away. And I asked her if we could have lunch. So I drove, met her for lunch. We talked about the science of reading. We talked about, is she going to have some training for teachers? And yes, she was. And could I look at her warehouse and see all the materials? And it was a great opportunity to actually be in a place where somebody totally took on this huge endeavor to create a curriculum based on what she learned about the brain research, which happened because she had twin boys, and the boys, when they were young, second and third grade, were really, really struggling. And she also was a poor speller going through school. And so her story is amazing. And so it's coming from her heart. It was not coming as a, I'm going to make a ton of money by creating a curriculum. No, not at all. So I attended her master training course and started training teachers myself for free. It's a 4-day workshop, 6 hours a day, and that's a condensed version. When I went to the master training, it was longer than that. We spent several more hours than that. So this is the part where Feller School is going to be very unique. Not only will we have a school for children K through 5, but we will also have our training center, and we've already trained close to 30 teachers. And I'm opening up another workshop this fall. It's 4 different Saturdays this fall, 2 in November and 2 in December. And I just put out the notice a couple of days ago, and I've got 4 people that, are already, ready to get trained. And I also trained teachers in the schools you can see on the slide there, in public schools and private schools. And there's a private school nearby that the lower school head is requiring that all the teachers receive the Logic of English training. And so I'm also following up with coaching and, just you have a problem, call me, whatever. And so now we're starting to charge for this time so that all that money can go to building our school. We currently have let's take a look at the next slide and see if this is going to address what I want to say. Okay, well, this is the training. We have a cute little graphic there just showing that we truly are teaching the science of reading. And you can see all of the different skills that teachers will learn. And we'll start with the brain research. So you can all just take a look at that at your leisure. But I did want to say, because we are not a full-fledged school yet, our goal is 2022 fall, and we started with a summer camp this past summer, 8 weeks, 4 days a week, 7 hours a day. We had 4 kids who attended every single day. So for 32 days this summer, there were 4 kids who actually didn't go on vacations and, didn't sign up for other camps. And then we had 9 other children who attended for at least two weeks. And so what we did was we used the Logic of English curriculum, and the kids all left. Well, I do want to say the majority of them were 8 and 9 years old. So they're the ones that are hitting 3rd grade or are in 3rd grade, which I'm sure a lot of you who are watching today know that that is a very critical, that is a very common year, I should say, that parents really start to panic because kids are starting to get books that don't have pictures. So anyway, it was a huge success. All the kids left being able to write independently in cursive handwriting, beautiful. They learned their 75 phonograms and several spelling rules, not all 31, but the ones that were relevant for their age. And we had a lot of fun, and I can't wait till next year. Kids were, I have to say, the first couple days were really hard. Oh, why do we have to be at school? Because this classroom that we're renting for $600 a month, and now we do our tutoring here, by the way. I just wanted to say we do our tutoring and homework club here. So, but over the summer, they were in a classroom, and the first couple of days were hard, but after that, they loved it. They got recess, got to eat lunch in the classroom. You know, it was a great experience. So we already have, you know, lots of experience just managing a classroom, and obviously Deb and I obviously have been classroom teachers, so it's no big deal. Next slide, please. So Deb, do you want to wrap this up? This is
Sure. Yeah.
our last slide.
That gives you a kind of an idea of who we are, where our story or our journey has been, and what our next step is. It's a big step, but we want to be part of the answer. We really want to put kids first and make this all about the students, because it does matter in their lives, whether or not they can read. And so our core curriculum and everything is going to be grounded in the science of reading. And we're also very much committed to supporting and training teachers, any school, anywhere, anytime, and then following that up with coaching as well. So that's a little bit about us and where we're at with Beller School.
Thank you, Deb and Kim. We do have a question in the chat, and if anybody else has a question, please feel free to put that into the chat, or when we get done answering the first one, if you want to unmute, that's fine as well. We have a question. What do you anticipate you will use to teach the strands of language comprehension?
So I guess I'm a little confused about the language comprehension. When I think of the strands of reading, I think about the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary development. So I guess I'm a little bit confused about language comprehension. Our entire curriculum is language-based.
Right.
The best thing that I can hear in a classroom is kids talking and sharing, and so all of our, even though our students, the majority of our students will be working heavily on decoding words and learning spelling rules and that sort of thing. We read aloud to the kids. We have audio books. We have all different ways that kids can build their understanding of what's being read those ways. And so being that we're really taking the kids that are struggling the most, our emphasis is really on getting them to become independent readers. I do want to say that some of the best decodables for those kids who are really at that maturity age where they want to be carrying around chapter books are the simple words, the simple word readers by Sigdom. I can't remember her last name. But those have been phenomenal for these kids.
And I'm going to say something else, Kim, for comprehension, not to interrupt you, but
No, go ahead.
it's a full comprehensive program. We know from the research, if kids are fluent in decoding and able to do that, it frees them up for their cognitive ability to actually comprehend. We're rounding off our curriculum with this science and social studies, where they're going to get a lot of that rich language and vocabulary and conceptual understanding of some really core important topics, so to say. So while our focus is on the basic and the foundational skills, those will lead then to the comprehension skills, and through the logic of English, it also has that rich language development already embedded in the curriculum.
Including, you know, the study of morphology.
Yep.
And etymology. So
So Logic of English is a complete comprehensive program for what grade levels?
So Logic of English, they have two different tracks. One of them is for ages 4 to 7. So it's slower, and it's there's a lot of emphasis on phonemic awareness. And then there's the 8 through adult. And it is it's a reading, writing, spelling program that it includes the grammar. It includes oh, I should have that in front of me, right? Grammar and vocabulary and oh, this is something that's really important. I don't know, I can't believe I didn't say this, but it's differentiated. So when you're teaching an 8-year-old who has really mastered the basic phonograms, the basic 75 phonograms, and is ready to be spelling more multisyllable words and more complex words, there are 3 different levels of spelling. And we don't do spelling tests in this program, we do spelling analysis. And so when we're checking for understanding, and that's the other thing about this program, is that every 5th lesson, there's an assessment. And on that assessment, we're finding out all different parts of their knowledge, from the grammar to building vocabulary to words in context, and their phonics skills and their spelling rules, their knowledge about that. But the assessments are really cool because depending how they did on that assessment, you will be able to, there's a little chart that tells you, okay, if there's a number 1 next to that, if they have not mastered that skill, a number 1 would indicate that you really need to make sure that that skill is mastered before you move ahead in that particular area. And then if they have a 2, that means that, you know, it's okay, it's going to be coming up in the next few lessons. And then number 3 is, don't worry about it right now, that'll be introduced later. So I really love the progress monitoring of this program. It can't be beat. Honestly, it can't be beat. And it, you know, I tell the teachers that I train, don't be afraid to put the manual in your lap the first year. Don't try to make up your own way of expressing this material your first year. If you're new to this whole science of reading explicit instruction, if you're new to this, use the verbiage, because I tried. I tried to put my own personality and spin in this, and it's so efficient and so succinct the way that it's written in here that you can't help but make sure that you're being very thorough in your instruction. So
I think another really important point, no matter what instructional materials people are using, one of the things I see happen in education, and I've seen it in my 30+ years, is people that are struggling to consider what might not be working for them and what they may have to change, or the new words that are getting used, whether, I mean, I went through from whole language to balanced literacy, science of reading, evidence-aligned practices, whatever you want to say. I'm seeing more and more people that have concerns about the new term science of reading, evidence-aligned practices, that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. And I don't know where that is coming from, because that's certainly not what the science says, that it is important to know our students and what our students need. And the word differentiation, as you said, is an important piece of that as well, and knowing what students need. And those assessments, informal, formal, help us to know what areas students need. where our instruction is targeted, and that's data-based instructional decision making. So I'm glad you said that, and I think that's an important piece to point out with the science of reading. So thank you. I appreciate your time and you sharing.
Absolutely.
And
Rachel,
we are, yes.
Could I just say one more thing?
Yes.
And just one little thing, and that is, for teachers, just from the experience and talking to all of these teachers in the training, there's a common theme, and that is that we just want something that we can anchor on, right? So it's not to say that in my mind, I think logic of English hits everything, every note. I'm dead serious about that. But I also want to say that it's more comforting for a teacher when they're starting to make this transition. If they have like an anchor curriculum that includes the grammar and the spelling and the writing and the rich vocabulary, how nice would it be to have it all in one place, right? For your first year, just to get you that whole mindset, that it's a totally different mindset than what I was doing with whole language balanced literacy, cueing systems, all that kind of stuff with my younger kids. So I'm not trying to sell logic of English, but I kind of am, just because it's the teachers love it. It's got everything, and you don't have to have a separate grammar program and a separate spelling program, and it can all, at least for your first experience, it's really.
And I think that's really one of our purposes and our goals at the Reading League of Wisconsin is, while we do not promote one instructional resource, it's important for school districts to have some support in hearing from other schools, districts that are going through the process of selecting instructional resources. In my day, we called that piecemealing. I took a little piece of here and a little piece of there. And I get a lot of questions from people about wanting a comprehensive program, instructional resource. And I think that's what we've tried to accomplish in our roundtables, is hearing from people that have gone through this process. And I know for sure we'll be hearing from Angie about their district and some of the instructional resources. And our other two roundtables, if you watch those, you will see other school districts talking about the different instructional resources. And a really important piece is to know what to look for in those resources and what not to look for. So a plug to the National Reading League: on their website, you will find a rubric that will help you go through, when you are looking for instructional resources, of what to be looking for and what you should not be seeing. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and we are going to go on to Sarah, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, guys. This was so interesting. I planned on having a partner, Brady, but as I shared with some others, he has making a presentation at our school board meeting tonight and is unable to join. So I shifted the presentation slightly. So this first part is a little bit about kind of where I go. So it's a little more personal to me. And then the next part I can share out around the district. So I will do my best to represent everything as I feel, necessary. So ask questions. But for me, similar to like Deb shared and Kim, my journey is very bizarre. So I came to the state of Wisconsin through Nebraska. I was born and raised in Nebraska. I'm a big Husker fan. So if that makes any connections, you can just know, go Big Red. And I taught there. I was a theater major. And from my time in Nebraska, I taught theater, I taught English, I just loved it. And I had a really important class that I was able to teach because one of the weird things that people may find out, a lot of conversations around secondary doesn't happen, like 7 through 12 students, they're like forgotten in the reading world. And so I was working with students with special education needs in reading and in our basic English class. And that was like my first glimpse of like, oh, struggling readers. What does this look like? Wow. And then I got married, and I married somebody from Wisconsin, and I guess I had to move. So I moved and applied to 40 different schools and had one interview, and it happened to be at New Berlin Eisenhower, which is our 7 through 12 school. And I've been there for 9 years. And thank you, because it's provided me with so much great, like, stepping stones and amazing humans. And some of the people in my district are in here right now, and it makes me so very happy. But I did my first year, and that was right at the start of the RTI process. So about 9 years, we were implementing reading support for 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th graders, 11th graders. These were those students that were below the 40th percentile. And our support was reciprocal teaching and some, not a lot of phonicsy things, but a lot of comprehension things. And our assessments were pretty much just a screener. And that's about it. A CBM. Oh yeah, we had CBMs. And so at the end of that year, I had finished my first year here in Wisconsin, and they're like, "Whoa, we want to keep you, but we also want you to keep in this reading job. So what do you think about getting your 316?" And I was like, okay. So I went and got my 316 at UW Stout online. And then I kind of noticed there was some gaps. I loved the whole process. I loved learning. I loved learning about reading. I loved taking my love of like theater, putting that into something. But then I was working with students, and I had one student in particular who just had a profound impact on me. And she was struggling. Her mom didn't know what to do. We talked a lot a bit. I was like, okay. And then we brought up some like just names of things, and Orton Gillingham came up. And then her mom found that in Milwaukee, the Children's Dyslexia Center was offering free training around in Orton Gillingham. So I called and I applied, and I joined a cohort of 8 different individuals to become a tutor. And so I was shook. Like, that's like my nice word, but it was so interesting. And that's where Mary Newton, who you'll see on this call, that's how I met her. She was a part of our training. I loved working at the Dyslexia Center with students, and a lot of them were in that secondary realm. So I had a 7th grader, I had a couple of 6th graders, and then I had 2 high school kids, and they were all still living in the secondary world. And then after that, I went back to still providing reading and being a reading interventionist at the secondary world. And I'm like, there's something missing. And then through some contacts with the Wisconsin State Reading Association, I met Dr. Colleen Pinnell, who was another individual who shared information. And she was my professor for my 317 license at Carroll. And she and I we had a lot of great conversations around things. And, it was very interesting. And I got my 317 certificate, and now I'm living as an interim reading instructional coach at strictly New Berlin Eisenhower. So that's kind of my journey. And over the last couple of years, I've had some amazing colleagues that I've gotten to work with, especially, I was hoping they were joining too, but Laura Barbieri and Sam Jane are 2 of the colleagues that I work with. I feel like their names needed to be noted because they're amazing. But we kind of participated and created a book study around David Kilpatrick's work. And for a pandemic summer, we spent that time reading a lot of Kilpatrick, and that conversations were so incredibly important. And I took the work that I had from the Dyslexia Center and put that importance of multisensory learning, and through a lot of questions and being curious and a lot of discussion. That's kind of where I blossomed, and I did more. I mean, we read, like I'm kind of looked ahead a little bit, but a lot of the books that are always talked about. So between this, The Reading Mind, or Proust and Squid. And so we kind of shared and brought those into our discussion. I read The Reading Mind, and Sam read something, and Laura read something, and that just created a teamwork. And so through that research, we started to shift our own interventions slightly. And then I was privileged enough to be trained in a really great reading So I was able to go be sent in that, and that's a nice multisensory tool if you're unfamiliar with it. But then, you know, as we continue on and as I continue to grow, it's a lot of where it goes is just like, what do you want? What do you need? And as I think a lot of teachers are, we're just lifelong learners. And so when it comes to how do we grow and how do we move, it goes to like professional development. Big fan of what the Reading League puts out. It's amazing. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about the rubric that Rachel just shared kind of on the next section. But just to kind of cover my slides, it was a lot. And right now in our district, we have a lot of conversations around this. So if you, Mary, you want to go to the next slide. And I saw Deborah's question. It's called Really Great Reading. They break it down into 6 different categories, but it's really cool. So one thing that Brady and I did get to discuss a couple of weeks ago was around this timeline. And so initially for me, there was a lot of individual curiosities between literature reviews, and that matched how Brady explored the science of reading as well. So we might do book studies on Kilpatrick. He was doing his own book studies, and he didn't add his part to it. Shame on Brady. But then in year 2, so in like our 3-year kind of discussion, I know that at the elementary schools, more research and shifts have been made into including different practices and different assessments to support getting the information to make informed decisions. So we started to look at some like-minded individuals. That was something that I was a part of. That's something Brady was a part of. I've been able to share kind of my expertise, if you want to say, or just like in curiosities with other reading specialists in our district. And they started to sprinkle like sore items into the curricular reviews. And so much so that like this year 3 is a major review year. We're all engaging in a K-12 curriculum alignment. And the rubric that Rachel just shared is one of our big kind of influences on how we're evaluating the tools that we are hoping to implement in our classroom. And so specifically in my classroom, we talked about Scarborough's reading rope, and I was sharing that information as well. And that's a lot of where we're looking. This year, I'm working with teachers and we're putting together a comprehension pilot intervention, which helps build secondary background knowledge that helps transfer to their content area classes, as well as supports their reading, because we know that background knowledge and vocabulary is absolutely huge. And some of those things that's not happening. And secondary students, that's a really nice touch point for them to show growth. And then, we're getting everybody, a whole team on board with those research-based practices, best practices, all kind of dictated by those trusted research groups and entities that do include the Reading League, using our rubrics and really just talking about, it says it so many times, but it's really the same thing. It's just having the conversations that matter and asking the right questions. So, it's tying to the simple view of reading. I mean, we had professional development 3 weeks ago, and I did a professional development on vocabulary. And in a 7 through 12 content rich situation, just doing something as simple as a vocabulary conversation and encouraging people, we're starting to build what's necessary to become skilled readers. And so that's really where we're at as a district. Like I said, some of our individuals are on it. And I was hoping Brady was able to share, but we're working hard, we're being receptive, and we're working hard to be just listeners and curious individuals to ensure that our students are starting off on the right directions. That I know Brady shared a lot about, like the pre-K to 2nd grade, by reevaluating the screener assessments that we use and ensuring that the data is supporting the work that we're moving towards.
Thank you, Sarah. I think what's really important is thinking about Kim and Deb presenting and talking about the early years, the elementary years, and trying to focus on preventing students getting to the middle school, high school level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also know that we have to also, though, be prepared to know that there's, for a while at least, there's always going to be students that get to the middle school and the high school level that are going to need the focus.
Well,
So-
and exactly, Rachel. And I think that even at those secondary levels, it's being aware that there are assessments built for them that you can use to help to identify the gaps that they may be coming into and then address the gaps specifically. I noticed Sandy asked what specific interventions align to the science of reading. And I think Kim kind of talked about it briefly as one that she uses. But we're a big fan of rewards, which is a vocabulary, like at a secondary level, it's rewards is a vocabulary-based intervention, talking about etymology and morphology. And then I mentioned really great reading, which uses Boost, Blast, and Blitz. That's their kind of programming, and then HD words. And that's that multisensory tool. And it's really great. It's got tools for kids to manipulate. And we know we can't make, the Anita Archer is the program. And we use all these as ways to because programs work for some, it's not perfect. And so we found that we adjust them slightly. So we might add more content specific connected texts to some interventions that may not have that. And we kind of use the fluency portion of it. And, it's really interesting to have it all be attempted. Our growth is there. There's some great success. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Rachel, but I know
No,
we were
thank
going
you.
on that.
That's great. And I'm glad you pointed out, I saw Sandy, your question as well about what reading intervention aligns with the science of reading. Well, as a former RTI director, that's a question that we talked about often. And that could be hours long webinar discussing that, because it really, and I see Mary responded to it as well, it depends upon the student's needs. It depends upon where they are at in the big areas of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, all of the different pieces of reading. So what's really important is, when, as an RTI director, it was to make sure I worked with high school teachers that were very honest, that would say to me, I'm not a reading teacher, I'm an English teacher, because that's what they were trained, but they were unaware of the fact that and I wish I could turn around and show you the quote on the back of my sweatshirt, there's no comprehension strategy that's going to be strong enough for a child that cannot read the words. So you need to know where that student is at in the progression of learning to read. So that's such a big question of what intervention aligns with the science of reading. And I'll take you back to the curriculum evaluation tool. And I posted that link that you can use that as a resource to be able to choose instructional materials. Of course, focusing on core instruction first, because no intervention is strong enough to fix a weak core program, your tier 1 instruction, but using that evaluation tool to help look at your instructional resources is where we suggest that people start as they're looking at those instructional resources, and also focusing on the professional development. And knowing, I have friends that are in this process right now in their school districts. Do you have people on that committee that have the professional development around what to be looking for in instructional materials? And again, what shouldn't be in those instructional materials? So that evaluation tool is a great place to start, because it gives you that list. So any questions? More questions for Sarah? All right, we will then, thank you very much, Sarah. We will then go to Angie. Mary, if you want to go to Angie's slide, and Angie, you can take it from here, please.
Thanks, Rachel. Like Sarah, I have a kind of different story. I started out my career as a high school biology teacher. So I went to a top-rated science education program. I have an undergraduate degree in biology and science education. So I came out of college with a lens on research, on evidence, and how important that was. So I started as a high school biology and physical science teacher. This is probably the most defining moment of my career. I asked the kids on a little note card if there's anything they needed me to know about them. And one of my students wrote that he couldn't read. And when you're a new teacher, they give you the gift maybe of giving you all of the most vulnerable learners. So I had every student that had an IEP, whether they were EBD, CD, whatever the label was. I had all the EL students, a lot of at-risk learners. And what became clear to me in my work was that teaching photosynthesis and glycolysis seemed silly when they couldn't read. So that coupled with, I was a new teacher, I worked all the time. After 2 years in the classroom, I decided that maybe this wasn't the career for me. While teaching, I was also working part-time at the airport, and I had a frequent flyer who was a professor at Eau Claire. And he said, well, we have a grad assistantship to get your master's in reading, and districts really need reading specialists. Would you want to do that? And I was like, well, I like to read, sure. And they had health benefits. So I went back to school. I quit my job, went back to school, picked up a master's of reading, and then I did some independent study work with Dr. Vicki Snyder in special education. I loved working with my students with disabilities because they could think outside the box in high school, which was fantastic if you're a science teacher. So I picked up a master's of special education with my master's of reading. So in full disclosure, I don't have a different lens. So in my undergraduate work, I read the National Reading Panel. I studied project follow-through. I was reading Reed Lyon's work, Mote's work, Adams' work, Schlewitz. Like that was my entire master's program. So I ended up getting a job in public school. Again, I decided I should try it again. And I worked in a high school, a high-performing high school in Wisconsin. And when I got there, what I noticed is that my students with disabilities, at the time, they had to have an average or above average IQ to qualify, were largely pulled out, and they had like movie Fridays. So over the 10 years that I did that job, I moved kids out into general education. I worked closely with their teachers to pre-plan so they would be able to access the grade level curriculum materials, but had supports in place to compensate for their disabilities in reading. And then I talked my very kind administrator into letting me teach reading classes. So I taught 3 or 4 hours of reading classes a day at a high school, which was really unusual. And we moved our test scores significantly. So they were pretty happy about that. I used Scarborough's rope. I looked at all the areas, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. I used, and I still use this assessment. I use the core reading assessment. It's one of the few reading assessments that has a vocabulary component. So I really, really appreciated that. So after doing that for a while, I decided, and I could, when I had students, like some of them had massive gains, largely because they had poor instruction earlier on, not because I was magical or not because they had a disability, but they, I think, were mislabeled for a variety of reasons. Some of them had multiple schools. Some of them had some home lives that caused them to maybe not behave in a way we would want them to in school. So I thought, what am I doing in the high school? Because by the time they got to me, there was a lot of emotional damage that had been done because they had failed for so long. So I decided, much to the irritation, I think, of my high school principal, to go to an elementary school and be a reading specialist, instructional coach. So I did that. I was adamant that I needed to teach, to have interventions and provide support in the classroom, because you can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem. And what I knew was that if I was going to remediate students build those foundational skills, I could not then put them back into a system that wasn't going to support them, or I would just have them again. So again, I don't know anything about, I mean, I didn't know anything about, I understood the queuing system, but I didn't use it because it wouldn't have occurred to me to use it. Balanced literacy and the research in the 90s was the 5 areas of reading. And then the balance part was you give the students what they need when they need it. So it took me a long time to figure out that that wasn't what the people around me were talking about. So I did that. I put my LLI kits in the furnace room because I didn't understand why you would want to use an intervention that had a negative effect size starting in 2nd grade. So that's what I did. I begged and pleaded for the district. So I was one of 13 elementary schools. I had a really, really lovely principal who let me do what I wanted because our data was good. But I got a lot of pushback from central office because we had a whole language-based core program that wasn't working. We were given intervention materials that weren't going to move kids. So after a year of begging that we look at our data and kind of after a year of continual pushback, I decided that this maybe was not the best choice for me. We did have the highest growth scores in our city, but even if I put those in front of people, they didn't want to look at them. So I left the school district, and then I went to work I took a job for a superintendent that was spectacular. I did some work in CTE, and then I left education again. And I went to work for Wisconsin Literacy out of Madison. They're a nonprofit. They support adult learners. So after 2 years of doing that and supporting vulnerable populations that couldn't read, I decided to go back into education. So I found myself again in a school district. I did some research and found a superintendent that was spectacular and very supportive. So that's how I came to Eleve-Strum. During that time, I continued to read about reading. I continued to do PD around that. So I came into a school where they weren't used to using data, where there was not a core program for reading. They had some materials, but teachers weren't using anything consistently. So anyway, that's kind of how I got to where I got. On this slide, I just put some of the books that I read that were impactful to me and that I continued to read. So science of reading, the second question we were asked to answer is, how does that drive our instructional practices? Frankly, I won't do it unless I can find research for it. So whether it's a strategy or a program or whatever it is, I dig into the research and try to figure out, like, does this have an effect size, and what is the effect size? And then what is it targeted to? The biggest challenge for me, in full disclosure, I have a couple of friends who laugh at me often, is I often don't understand what people are talking about when they're talking about what they're doing in reading, because that's not how I was trained. So I don't have a different journey than the science of reading. Can you advance my slide, please?
Angie, can you just go back for a second? I'm curious. So remind me where you went through your grad work that university was providing that type of instruction to you.
Okay, so I went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I got a master's at the same time, remember, in special education and in reading. So okay. I would tell you the majority of the science of reading that I learned was in my special education programming. I was able to do some independent study work too, because I was real nerdy about science of reading. My master's of reading was helpful in that I had some really fantastic literature coursework. So I think one of the things, Rachel, you had said earlier that in the science of reading, people think there's a focus on phonics and phonological awareness and fluency. And I would agree that that happens a lot, and it's alarming to me. So I think it was helpful for me because at the end of the day, in addition to all the skills, my job and teacher's job is to still create a love of reading in children. So you still have to get them to hand out books. You still have to hand out books like candy. You still have to talk the kids into reading and talking with kids and having conversations about books. Even if they have foundational skills, they still have to be readers. So so I'm not going to tell you that that Eau Claire is going to give you a science of reading background, but I don't have anything negative to say about my experience there because I was able to balance it with special education.
Okay, and thank you. And I just think that's also a big part of the Reading League's mission is to make sure our pre-service teachers, our undergrads are getting an education that is rooted in evidence-aligned practices. And with all of the educators I've worked with, it's quite obvious, especially even within our state, the variety of, of teachers coming out of college and the variety of methods that they have been taught. So I was just curious to hear more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, the bigger challenge for me. So I actually taught there for 7 or 8 years as an adjunct, and I taught the methods coursework, both in special ed and general ed. The challenge was not the teaching of the students. The challenge was, and the research would tell you this, they go out into the field and practice as their cooperating teacher. So I had very intentional science of reading background that I was teaching when I was there, but they would go out into their classrooms and there's no context for that. So I do think it has to be a both, like the universities have to respond, but then also the students have to be able to see that in practice.
Correct. And that's a big piece of it as well. And I know when Colleen Pinnell from Carroll University, she presented at one of our roundtables and she talked about how there can be that disconnect between students in their undergrad, students in a 316 program, and they're learning one way of teaching reading. And I don't mean one way, but several different evidence-aligned practices, and they're told what to follow, what not to follow, and then you go out into the schools, and if that cooperating teacher is teaching in a way that's in opposition to what the university taught, that's where we're getting our disconnect with our teachers.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this a little bit, but that's what I told my superintendent. I said, frankly, we have to take responsibility for the learning of our staff once they come to us. So our new teachers all go through letters training. So I have strong materials now and I love them. They're not perfect. So the teacher still makes the learning happen in the classroom. So anyway, that's just a kind of a side note, but so what came into Eleve-Strum, my job officially is called internal coach. Nobody knows what that is, including me. So what I'll tell you is that I deal with our intervention systems. I deal with our curriculum. I deal with our assessment framework. So like all the systems I'm supposed to be in charge of. So what I realized quickly is that my teachers are just lovely. I love them, but they didn't have any resources to fall back on that were strong. And then they hadn't spent a lot of time looking at like, what does it mean to be a first grade reader? Like, what do you have to be able to comprehend? What do you have to be able to write? What does it mean to be a third grade reader, a fifth grade teacher, a fifth grade reader, a ninth grade reader? So this is where I started. So my first year, COVID happens. That was great. And so we have this time. So what I did is I asked for volunteers to do some like book study and some learning with me. So we started with the Zaner Bloser article. It does a lovely job of breaking down the different areas of reading. It talks about super kids. I'm familiar with super kids. It doesn't matter that it talks about curriculum materials. It's a phenomenal article. And then there's a science of reading webinar put out by Amplify. There's I think there's 2 primers. They're also spectacular. So I started with that to build some background knowledge. I had given my teachers permission during the year to stop getting the children in kindergarten and first grade to a letter. When I was an elementary reading specialist, I spent some time researching leveling of text. Okay. You have to go to a school to learn how to do that. Like that's all made up. I mean, like if I did an evaluation where you took like are you a number? Are you a letter? I don't know. There was all the different ones, right? And like all the books were all mixed up. So I told my teachers, just stop that. We're not going to Harvard in first grade. So we don't have to know how to decode or how to read chapter books after kindergarten. That's not what we're looking to do here. So I had really tried to give them a permission to stop doing things, because oftentimes in education, we just tell teachers, you should just do more and more and more. And so really what we should be telling them is, let's stop doing all of the things that don't work and get down to some things that will work. So so that's why I started. And then we did Kilpatrick's book. We did that as a book study for building background knowledge. I love that book. I think it's a fantastic first read. It's easy to understand. There's excellent references in there. And then I talked my superintendent, who is spectacular, into paying for letters training for everybody. So this is optional. We don't require it, but we have a lot of staff doing it. We give a really lovely stipend when they finish their letters training. So, and then with people coming in that we hire, it is a requirement. So then they will have to do that from here on out. So my early childhood teachers did letters. My elementary principal did his letters training. And then a lot of my staff they're in the middle of their letters training. Then I took staff the first year that the Reading League had their conference. We went to that because it was virtual and we were virtual. So it worked out really, really well. I put that in my budget every year. And then the last year, with my title teacher and my special education teachers, my director of special ed, we read Conquering Dyslexia, because it's also a lovely read. It has some stories in there. The research is easy to understand. And then I put Scarborough's rope in front of people so much, like my support staff actually made one in the hallway. And then I talk a lot about the simple view of reading, because like 0.1 times 0.8 is not going to get you very far. So even if, whoever said it earlier, even if you can have strong language skills or comprehension skills, if you can't read the words on the page, and frankly, if you can read the words on the page, but you have no background knowledge and vocabulary, it's also not going to work out for you. So anyway, but then what became really important to me is that we adopt materials. So I'm kind of anal about the research again. So I wanted to frame up some things so that we didn't just have like a free for all on what everybody wanted. In full disclosure, I told my teachers, like, I don't care what the schools around us are doing. Nobody is getting it done for kids. So we could do something someone else is doing if it was backed in some evidence, but we want to move our children, and that's what our responsibility is. So we had an adoption process where we vetted through ed reports. That gave us a nice sounding, like a nice place to start. And then I also went to Louisiana Believes. If you haven't been there, they have a fantastic curricular material overview also. We picked programs, and then I vetted them through the science of reading. I used the Oregon. So Oregon has a nice tool for the science of reading. I love their Florida Center for Reading Research, and then Oregon is what I mostly go to. So we had it down to 3 programs that were based in the science of reading, and that also then were aligned for all the areas of ed reports. I understand there's some issues with ed reports, but I think if you understand what they are and you go into it with your eyes wide open, it can be helpful. So we looked at CKLA, that's the core knowledge. It's been around forever. E.D. Hirsch, by Johnny Can't Read, I believe. And then Wit and Wisdom, which I liked, pairs with Foundations, which is their phonics program, which pairs with GEODS, which is the decodables. So you have 3 programs that are interwoven, but they are 3 programs. And then EL. EL education has a very strong equity narrative, which I was also looking for. And then what I liked about EL was that they follow Erie's stages, which my staff had read about in Kilpatrick. So I would have been happy with any of those 3 programs. I could have made any of them work. And my staff ultimately chose EL education. So that is the curriculum materials. We're in our 2nd year of adoption of those, K-8. We did purchase CKLA for pre-K. And then we used, we purchased PAS for college and career for high school. Again, I vetted a number of high school programs, did some research, and then I gave the teachers, I think they had 6 choices, and they chose PAS to college and career. I think teachers have to have choice in what they're going to teach. but I wasn't gonna, like, I also felt an obligation as leading that charge that I'm gonna give them strong materials to pick from. We're doing that right now. We're doing a math adoption with the same premise. So the last question we were supposed to answer is, where do I look for professional development? So I put on here the source book. So CORE has spectacular webinars. Some are free, some cost money. They're excellent. I look at the Reading League, Voyager, Sopris Learning. I put that link on there before. Somebody said you have to match your intervention with your student need. They're correct. I have a, like, if you have a fluency issue, this is what you get. If you have a decoding issue, this is what you get. If you have decoding, fluency, vocabulary, these are the 3 things you get. So Sopris Learning just has tons of great stuff that's really well done. I have these lovely school psychologists at UW Eau Claire that I continue to stay in contact with. We just formed a partnership. We're starting tomorrow to do some after school interventions with some of their graduate students and some of my students. And then, like, I call and talk to people. So like I use Ravo, I love it, but there's a gap between Ravo. Ravo kind of ends at Magic E, and then Rewards picks up later on. And so there's this gap. And so I emailed Marianne Wolf at Tufts and I said, what would you recommend? And she said, oh, I'd recommend Empower. So we just are starting Empower right now. We have a chunk of, we have some 3rd graders that got hit hard by COVID and they're low, and I want them moving. So we just started that. And then the Reading Rockets, like, I still love them. I think they have great resources also. So that's where I look for professional development. So anyway, that's it.
Great, thank you, Angie. If anyone has any questions and you want to unmute or you want to type into the chat, please feel free, because we have just a few minutes. If there's any further questions, we have a few minutes that we can answer those. I'll watch the chat, and while we're doing that, Mary, if you want to go to the next slide, go to the next one yet too, please. There are several other places where you can go to listen to other people's journeys into the science of reading around the country. Curriculum Matters, if you just type in Curriculum Matters into the Google search, you will find they have a few webinars where educators from around the country talk about how they brought the science of reading into practice and the shifts that they use to go from reading workshop to research-aligned instructional practices. The Reading League National, if you go to their channel, you will find a roundtable discussing the science of reading as well. And then, as we've said throughout our presentation tonight, the Reading League Wisconsin YouTube channel has recordings of our first 2 roundtables, and tonight's roundtable will be on there as well. And I don't see any questions coming into the chat, and that's great because it's almost been an hour and a half, and I know for most of us that's about time for us to wrap things up. Mary, if you just want to go to the next slide, and I just have a couple more on here. Back one more. To wrap up, thank you very much to everybody for that, for presenting. We listened to a lot of great information in a lot of different areas. So thank you. And I'm so glad we were able to cover our K through 12. I think that's really important. We are looking to always do more roundtables for people to share their experience and to be able to support one another in Wisconsin, and for all those of you listening from outside of the state as well. You can contact us. What's the best way to do that, Mary? Our Facebook page is a great way to get in touch with us. If you go on Twitter, we have a Twitter page and you can message us there. And I think what's really exciting for us right now is we are getting ready to have our first regional conference working in Wisconsin to present the science of reading. And we have some great people that will be coming in that you have heard of, and many of them were mentioned tonight. And we also have support from our other Reading League affiliates in our region that will be coming as well. And so put that on your calendars for Friday, October 7th, under a year to go till we have our first big scale conference. Mary, anything else you'd like to
No,
add
I just
before we
wanted,
wrap it up?
I just wanted to mention that I did put the link in the chat box. So if you need a certificate of attendance, just click on that link and go and fill out that form. All it asks you for is your email and your first name and last name. And then I'll get the results from that form and I'll send those out tomorrow. So I don't know. I think that there's one more thing in the chat. Just thank you. Well, thank you to everybody. I thank you to Rachel for moderating again, and thanks to all our presenters, and thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight, and those of you who might watch this in upcoming weeks on our YouTube channel. And I think really working together, we're going to make a big difference in Wisconsin. I'm just so pleased to see things going the direction they're going. And some of the things that I heard tonight that are going on in New Berlin and at Feller School and the Feller training and Eleve-Strum and the professional development they're doing and the process, the thoughtful process to choose curriculum materials is just so fabulous and something that we just didn't hear 10 years ago. So I'm just really glad to see that happen. So, you know, stay in touch, follow our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter. We have email. You can email Mary at wi.thereadingleague.org and I can get back to you if you have any specific questions. So
yes, we're glad to help. And just so everyone knows, I know Sandy asked a question as well, and we'll be connecting tomorrow to address some of her questions. And again, it's really important for us to say how grateful we are to all of our educators that work every day to help our students learn how to read.
Yep. So I think that's it for tonight. And thanks for tuning in. And until next time, I guess, and just have a great evening and a great week. And we'll see you just the next time that we're online.
Right.